Hi, as Noel mentioned, I'm from Auckland Council's Archives Department. Basically, I'll start with the first thing you need to do if you're researching property is actually do not contact Auckland Council Archives. What you need to do is order a property file, which is not managed by Auckland Council Archives. This is managed by our building control and consents teams, which is a separate department again. But your property file, you order it online. It's there, on this website, which I've got a picture of here, it gives you the difference between a limb and a property file. And what you need, a property file will give you all the sort of information that the council knows about the property. A limb tells you about the land that it sits on. But essentially, everything the council has about your property, in theory, should be on this file. If it isn't there, then we may be able to help you. Emphasis on may. But this is the best place to start, because it's all digitised, it's all there, and it's all what the council's inherited from its legacy councils. And that's the other problem, which I'll soon allude to shortly. So, this is where I come in. What if there is nothing on your property file? Well, you can come and talk to us. Auckland Council, just giving a quick run through, as you probably already know, Auckland Council was created by a series of amalgamations, and the 2010 one was not the first one. We've had lots since 1883. So the reason why I mention this is that by 2010 we get 8 councils merging into one, is that it helps for you to know which council was in operation for the time period that you're researching. That will then reflect which records you need to consult in our collections. Because they're not just in one big homogenous lump called Auckland Council. We organise our records by the councils that created them. So I'll give you an example. This is a map showing the growth of Auckland and all the different councils as of 1989. And as you can see, Auckland was actually quite small. Auckland Central, as you may know it, was only in 1871 we were formed. And it's just that little bit that we know as a CBD now. But gradually we moved. And the area we're in today, in Epsom, well, in 1917, that becomes part of Auckland City Council. So we've had successive amalgamations. So, for instance, Mount Eden was its own council until 1989. Mount Albert was its own council until 1989. Yet Point Chevalier becomes part of Auckland in 1921. So all this information kind of affects whether records have survived, where they live, and how you might want to access them. So, what do we do as Auckland Council Archives? Well, we only manage records that were created by local authorities since about the 1860s. And our responsibilities now lie under the Public Records Act of 2005. Now, just a bit of a mention about the Public Records Act of 2005. Just because it exists as of 2005, yes, it means we should keep stuff, but we can't keep stuff that hasn't survived pre-2005. So if some of our predecessor councils threw stuff away, it wasn't illegal. We can only provide what has survived time for us to keep for the public. But we do our best. And what we do as archivists is that we select things. We don't keep everything. So we do not have the record of you paying your dog registration because we don't care about that over time. It's not an archive. We also don't care that you paid your rates. We have rates books, but we don't have your rates receipt bill that you received 5 years ago from the council saying thank you for paying your rates. They don't survive time. So there are selected records. Like there is legislation that says what kind of records we have to keep as a council. And minor stuff like that, under schedule, we can destroy. Financial records that most people seem to think the 7-year rule applies to everything. That's only the Financial Transactions Acts, which say you have to keep financial records for 7 years. It doesn't apply to every other record in creation. There's different acts that control also, that we're not just the Public Records Act. We also have things like the Building Acts and the Financial Transactions Acts. There's a number of acts that we are responsible to have to feed into as well, so it does reflect a bit more than just the Public Records Act. That's just a pretty picture of our office, well, one of our offices. And so what do we hold? Well, basically, if you think about what the councils do, we hold those sort of records. So roads, sewerage, drainage, parks, council buildings. And of course, records of people, cemeteries, and people building their houses, town planning, district schemes. We hold the minute books for different councils, and these just are about councils making decisions about what they do. Often they're actually quite apart. The more modern ones are actually quite detailed. The really early ones are quite basic. Literally, it'll just be a sentence saying, Mr. Such and Such raised a motion to do blah, and they all went yes or no. And there's no great, huge discourse about why. They just did. The most important things actually are subject files from our various council departments. They give you more details. We also hold rates books, photographs, building permit registers, etc. So, to research property at Auckland Council archives, so you might find your property file doesn't have quite what you expected. We have a range of records, and some of them are quite common across all councils, because all councils all have to do the same thing. The difference is that the survival rates of some records may not vary between different councils. And there are also some records relating to property that are unique to certain councils. So this is my point. We don't have everything. This is actually from a report from 1993 from Manukau City Council saying that we know that we're missing records because they took stuff to the Whitford tip. And it wasn't illegal at the time, but we've lost stuff and we don't know what we've lost because there's no records taken. Another example is in Birkenhead Borough. Birkenhead Borough Council in 1960, we know they took virtually all their records to the tip and destroyed them. We have their minute books and their rates books surviving pre that, but there's not a lot much, the rest of it's a bit patchy as to what survived the tip. This is an example of a photograph. We've got some photographs in our collection of houses. This is a nice one in Onehunga. And building permit information. Well, we do have some building permit information. The problem is, until the mid-20th century, the enforcement of building regulations is a bit patchy across the country. So, for instance, Birkenhead Borough required people to submit a building permit and a plan, but didn't require a duplicate copy to be kept. And this is quite common sort of in the early 20th century, is that they didn't require, councils didn't need you to submit your duplicate copy for them to keep. You just showed them your plan and they stamped it and you took it home. So that's why a lot of very early building permit plans don't survive. It's not that we threw them out, it's that they weren't required to be kept back then. And obviously later on, the council started realising, probably as homeowners were doing alterations and wanted to see plans, that it might be a good idea to have a duplicate copy kept. So then they changed the bylaws that made people submit duplicate copy for councils to keep. The other thing is, if your building work was considered trivial, you didn't have to apply for a permit at all. And I guess it varies depending on what each council considered trivial. So we do hold some building permit plans in our collection, but they haven't been kept consistently across all our councils. Or they haven't been transferred to the archives. Because the other thing is, your building is still there. It's a living record. And that's the point. It's a record. Records are not archives. Records are still things that we're still using. So that's why they'll never become an archive, because if the building's still there, the plans are still required by the successive homeowners. So if you stick it in an archive, the archives are closed, finished records that are no longer required for day-to-day use. So what we've got are sort of slightly odd situations where things have just ended up with us that we now look after, which is great. That's just a nice example of one of the rare surviving plans we have for Devonport. These are just samples, because we only have about 100 and something of these in our collection. Most of them are on the property files. But you can find building permit information in other places. We actually hold building permit registers. Now these can be a little bit harder to use, but you can go through and you can get an idea of roughly when the building work might have been done and how old the property might be. So for instance, from Mount Eden, our building permit registers start in 1905 and go right through to 1990, and they have indexes into them. So that could be, we may not have the plan of your house perhaps, but maybe you can actually find out when the house was built and who built it. Sometimes it records the names of the builders or the architects, the people that applied for the permits. We have no building permit plans for Mount Eden in our collections. We also have no building permit plans for Mount Albert in our collections. We have stuff for Point Chevalier because that amalgamated earlier into Auckland City, so we have some from the Point Chevalier region. So so for the Albert Eden area, mostly you'll have to look in other sources in our collection to find permit information. But they give you quite a good idea about what was going on with your house with these registers. You can trace through the various alterations that took place. Now, most people don't think about looking at plumbing and drainage registers. They're not very exciting sounding, are they? But you can find out when your property was connected to drains, because some of these older parts of Auckland weren't connected to town supply initially, or they didn't have, they had outhouses. This tells you when your house was connected to sewage. So it can give you an idea of roughly when your house, what was going on with your property, and it can tell you also the name of the property owner, which is quite a good thing if you're wanting to get like as Joanna said, about the history of your house and of who lived there and what they were doing. So this is an example, again this is a Northcote example, but this is basically what a drainage plan looks like. They're not terribly exciting, but it tells you where the drains go, which is actually kind of useful for you to know, that you might be digging up your backyard and you find a pipe you didn't know about because the council didn't know about it because it's really old. We've had a few instances of that where we've discovered pipes in people's backyards and they discovered the private drains. They weren't council connections, they were actually, the homeowner built a drain because they could and it went to something that's not there anymore. And then you dig up your backyard and find a pipe and you want to know what it is before you dig it out. So that can be really useful. Rates books. These are another useful tool to trace the age of a property. So basically they give an indication of when significant building takes place. So if you look at, say, a rates or evaluation book, if it's just a bare piece of land, the value of it won't be very high in terms of rates. But once you start seeing property being built or a structure being built on that land, the value goes up because the council will value it. It's worth more to the council, so therefore you're going to be paying more rates. So that can give you an idea. You can also find out the names and owners of the former occupiers of the property, and we have a large quantity of these, but also bear in mind there can be gaps in this history. So for example, for Mount Eden, we've got a pretty good collection. Unfortunately for Mount Albert, they cease after 1950. But pre that, really great. So that's an example of a Mount Eden rate book from 1913, which is one of our earliest ones, showing you the kind of information that you'll find. They won't give you the street address necessarily, they will give you the legal description at the time. And it isn't until later periods that we start getting street addresses appearing in rates and valuation rolls. So it can tell you quite useful things. Now, our unique records, which are quite special. For instance, for those of you that are sort of in the Point Chev and in the older areas of Auckland, unfortunately this won't apply to Mount Albert or Mount Eden, but we have valuers field sheets. Now, Auckland City Council was unique and it had its own valuations departments. All the other councils used the government valuers, but Auckland had its own department that did its own valuations. And these field sheets are literally just their notes that they made as they went from property to property and made notes about the owners, the occupiers, the occupations, the permits that were applied for, the dates those permits were applied for, and the costs and the values to calculate. And they also make a note of the land, the concrete paths, that kind of stuff. And sometimes there's newspaper articles stuck in. They're absolute real gems, and they're organised by street name. The 1908 map, I don't know whether you're familiar with that, that's actually on our website. That is literally the very early bit of Auckland, but that's an amazing treasure in our collection. And it has got an index online that's connected to the 1908 valuation rolls for Auckland, which gives you the name of the people that live there. It's a beautiful, beautiful map, and it took them a very long time to literally, it's got the telegraph poles, the hedges, the fences, you name it is marked on that. It's just amazing. And we have got some later additions for Remuera and Parnell and Greylin as they expanded into Auckland City. And then Mount Eden does actually have valuation field sheets, very similar. They're actually government valuation records. They're a bit later, but they are quite interesting as well. And they also have house connection plans. These are the drainage plans I was talking about. These are really neat. So you get an idea of what size your house looked like. So you might find that actually what you've got now is slightly bigger because they shoved on some extra rooms post the drainage connections. Plus it also gives you the name of the owner and the name of the drain layers. So that's an example of the 1908 map that's showing Myers Park. Another unique record that people wouldn't have thought about is termites. Auckland, unfortunately, we were a main centre for termite infestation. This occurred sort of in when New Zealand started importing telegraph poles and railway sleepers and tramline sleepers. So of course all along the main transport routes that Carolyn mentioned, we had wooden things, bits of wood imported from Australia that were infested with termites. Well, those termites decided that those bits of wood weren't so great, so we'll just migrate into your house and start eating bits of that. Well, you might find that you've got a structure in your house, like the veranda for instance, that looks kind of old, but it's not that old, and it should be. It might be because it had to be removed because of termite infestation. So we hold the records of the Joint Termite Control Authority, which unfortunately for you guys in the Albert Eden area, it was a very termite area. And so we have records of the inspection records of fields, sheets and the maps, recording all the termite inspectors' notes about individual properties and what they found on them. Quite often that was just finding common old New Zealand borer beetle, but even then they still had to treat it because of course New Zealand borer beetle also causes quite significant damage to structures. But they might make a note that they found a fence on a property that then had to be burnt and destroyed, and that kind of thing. So they're quite fascinating. People didn't realise we actually have those, but Mount Eden has a separate set of records as well. And then the other councils have other sort of things, like Takapuna City Council has a LIMS record sheets which record building permits and things, and they also have survey maps. And that's just an example of one of the Auckland City Council termite inspectors with some termite damaged timber. We've got some great photographs in our collection of some of the termite damage they found, of interiors of houses where the skirting boards are being totally munched away by the termites. And the eradication was pretty big. We still have pockets of termites in New Zealand, not many, but there are little controlled pockets, most in the poor areas that the NPI keep a close eye on, but pretty much we managed to eradicate most of our big termite infestations, and of course now we have only used treated timber and do not import termite infested timber from Australia. So basically, if you have any questions or can't find what you're looking for we have a website, we're about hard to find, so just Google Auckland Council Archives and that should bring us up as your first hit. On that we do have access to our database online, which you can search. You may not always find what you're looking for, so if you don't find what you're looking for, don't give up, just contact us and we will be able to help guide you on our records. We have 3 offices at the moment, but we're in the process of moving as well. Central office for the central area records is in the basement of the Auckland Central Library. We're not affected by the building works, although it was a bit noisy in our little bit of the world. Our Takapuna and West Auckland offices for the former North Shore and Waitakere City Council collections has just moved from our Takapuna office, which is now closed, into Bledisloe House in the central city. This access is now by appointment only because a building's got no public access. Plus also we still haven't relocated all our collections, so it's taking us a little while to find stuff. It's not that we've lost it, it's just that we haven't put it in we're trying to update our database frantically, but we've got over 9,500 cartons to update. And we're also about to, I believe, we've just found out, we're also now being told we're having to move out of our Manukau office, and that we're moving into Bledisloe House as well. So we're a little bit under pressure, but we'll do our best to help you. And certainly just use that email address, and that will find us.